My wife said, "Sign the divorce papers or lose everything." The words hung in the air between us, cold and sharp as shards of glass. Her face, a mask of cold determination, offered no room for negotiation. She stood there in the wreckage of her own party, a queen surveying a conquered kingdom of champagne flutes and discarded canapes, and in her hand she held the document that was meant to be my surrender. I looked at the papers, then back at her. The woman I had spent a decade loving, building a life with, had become a stranger, a predator. In that moment, I knew my life was about to be cleaved in two. She thought she was giving me an ultimatum. What she was really giving me was a key to a cage I hadn't even realized I was in. I took the papers from her hand. Our fingers didn't touch, and in the silence that followed, I made a quiet promise to myself. She wanted me to lose everything. She had no idea that she had just lost it all. It began, as these things often do, not with a bang, but with a series of quiet erosions. Our life, viewed from the outside, was a portrait of success. We lived in a beautiful home in a desirable suburb, a two-story colonial that Amelia had inherited from her grandmother shortly before we were married. It was her pride and joy, a symbol of her lineage, her status. I was a software engineer, my salary more than comfortable, providing the steady financial bedrock upon which Amelia built her world of social engagements, charity luncheons, and boutique shopping trips. We were, by all accounts, a power couple, a team. But inside those beautifully maintained walls, the reality was different. The foundation was cracked. For years, I had been the steady, quiet partner, the one who worked late to fund the lifestyle she curated, the one who came home not to a shared partnership, but to a list of expectations. The lawn needed mowing. A picture frame was crooked. The caterer for her upcoming event had called, and I needed to handle it. The house, her house, was a constant, demanding presence. When my mother passed away 3 years ago, my world tilted on its axis. My father, George, was left adrift. They had been married for 50 years, a unit so complete that one half seemed unable to function without the other. He was a retired carpenter, a man of quiet dignity whose hands, though now spotted with age, had built half the furniture in my childhood home. He was lost in their empty house, a ghost haunting the rooms he'd shared with his wife. The decision for him to come live with us felt natural, necessary. It was, I thought, what any decent son would do. Amelia agreed, but her agreement was paper thin. It came with conditions, spoken and unspoken. "Of course, Alex, your father is welcome," she had said, her voice dripping with a practiced, superficial sympathy. "We'll just need to make sure he's comfortable." Comfortable was a euphemism. It meant out of sight. My father, a man who had once filled a room with his quiet strength, seemed to shrink within the walls of Amelia's house. He spent most of his days in his room, the one we'd converted from a guest bedroom, surrounded by a few precious pieces of furniture he'd brought with him. He would read or watch old movies, or sometimes just sit by the window, looking out at a world he no longer felt a part of. His presence was a constant source of low-grade friction. Amelia saw him not as my father, not as a grieving widower, but as an imposition, an unwelcome piece of furniture that clashed with her carefully designed aesthetic. "Alex, could you ask your father not to leave his newspaper on the coffee table? It looks so cluttered." "Alex, does he have to watch his television so loud? I can hear it all the way downstairs." "Alex, my friends are coming for brunch. It would be best if your father just had a tray in his room." Each request was a small cut, a tiny splinter under my skin. I would talk to my dad, gently, trying to bridge the gap between my wife's intolerance and my father's quiet existence. "Dad, maybe we can keep the papers in here," I'd say, hating the words as they left my mouth. He would just nod, his eyes clouded with a sadness that I knew was not just for his late wife, but for his own diminished place in the world. He understood. He was trying not to be a burden. The thought of it broke my heart. I had poured myself into that house. My inheritance from my grandparents, a significant sum, had been invested, as Amelia put it, into a complete kitchen remodel and the addition of a sunroom. "It's for us, Alex," she had cooed. "It's for our future. It increases the value of our asset." I never questioned the use of the word "our." I supervised the contractors, paid the invoices from my personal account, and spent weekends painting walls and landscaping the yard. I was building a home. I see now that I was merely renovating a property. My name was never added to the deed. When I'd brought it up once, years ago, she had laughed it off. "Oh, darling, it's just a piece of paper. The lawyers said it's cleaner this way for tax purposes. You know this house is ours." I had believed her. It was easier to believe her. The 10th wedding anniversary was the catalyst. For Amelia, it was not a celebration of our marriage, but an opportunity for a grand social performance. She planned the event with the precision of a military general. A marquee on the lawn, a string quartet, a top-tier caterer from the city. The guest list was a who's who of her social circle, a collection of wealthy, judgmental people I had little in common with. A month before the party, she dropped the bomb. We were in the kitchen, the gleaming, expensive kitchen I had paid for. She was scrolling through a list on her tablet, a frown creasing her brow. "Alex," she said, without looking up, "we need to talk about your father." I felt a familiar tightening in my chest. "What about him?" "The party," she said, finally meeting my eyes. Her gaze was cool, appraising. "I don't think he should be there." The words landed like stones in the pit of my stomach. "What do you mean, not be there? He lives here, Amelia." "Don't be deliberately obtuse," she sighed, a sound of pure exasperation. "He can't be wandering around during the party. It's just not appropriate. He'll be uncomfortable. My friends won't know what to say to him. He'll just sit in a corner and look sad, and it will bring the whole mood down." "The whole mood?" I stared at her, incredulous. "He's my father. He's grieving. He's not a party decoration that clashes with the drapes." "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she snapped, her voice rising. "You get so emotional. This is a very important night for me, for us. It's our 10th anniversary. I just want it to be perfect. Is that too much to ask?" "It is, if perfect means hiding my father away like he's something to be ashamed of." My own voice was rising now, a rare occurrence in our house. "Don't be so dramatic," she said, her tone dismissive. "I'm not ashamed of him. I just think it would be better for everyone, including him, if he weren't in the middle of all that chaos. He could have a nice, quiet evening in his room." We argued, a circular, fruitless debate that went nowhere. I insisted he be treated with dignity. She insisted her party be flawless. In the end, we reached a tense, unspoken stalemate. I assumed, foolishly, that my refusal to banish my own father from his home would be the final word. I underestimated her ruthlessness. The day of the party was a blur of frantic activity. Florists and caterers swarmed the house. The string quartet was tuning up on the lawn. I was running errands, picking up extra ice, dealing with a problem with the outdoor lighting. When I got back, an hour before guests were due to arrive, I went upstairs to check on my dad. His door was open. The room was empty. A cold dread washed over me. I called his name. No answer. I went downstairs, my heart starting to pound. I found Amelia in the foyer, directing a waiter where to place a tray of champagne flutes. She looked radiant in a silver dress, her hair and makeup flawless. "Where's my father?" I asked, my voice tight. She didn't look at me. "It's been handled," she said breezily. "Handled? What does that mean, Amelia? Where is he?" Just then, the front door opened, and her younger brother, Leo, walked in. Leo was a carbon copy of Amelia's entitlement, distilled into a smug 20-something package. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first car, and a smirk that I had long wanted to wipe from his face. "All sorted," he announced to Amelia, dusting off his hands. "The old man is checked in. He was a bit confused, but the nurses there are used to it." I felt the blood drain from my face. "Checked in? Checked in where?" Leo finally looked at me, his eyes full of condescending pity. "The Silver Pines Respite Home, mate. Just for the weekend. Amelia thought it would be best. Give him a little vacation, you know?" I stared at Amelia, my whole body vibrating with a rage so profound it left me speechless. She had gone behind my back. She had arranged for her sniveling brother to take my grieving father and dump him in a care facility as if he were a stray dog. "How could you?" I finally whispered. The words were barely audible. She had the audacity to look annoyed. "Alex, do not make a scene. Guests are arriving in 20 minutes. It's done. He's perfectly safe. We can pick him up on Sunday. Now, please go and get changed. Your suit is laid out on the bed." She turned her back on me, dismissing me as easily as she had dismissed my father. I stood there, frozen in the middle of my own home, a stranger at my own anniversary party. The sound of the first doorbell ringing was like a death knell. I was trapped. To make a scene would be to cause a massive, public humiliation. To remain silent felt like a betrayal of my father, of myself, of everything I believed in. So I did nothing. I went upstairs, my feet like lead, and put on the suit she had chosen for me. I was a puppet, and she was pulling the strings. The party was a nightmare. I moved through the crowd, a fixed smile plastered on my face, accepting congratulations and compliments on our beautiful home. Every laugh, every clink of a glass felt like an insult. I felt disembodied, watching myself perform the role of the happy, successful husband. The true moment of humiliation, the one that would burn itself into my memory forever, came later. I was standing near the French doors that led to the garden, trying to find a quiet corner to breathe. I overheard voices from the patio just outside. It was Amelia and Leo. They were laughing. "You should have seen his face, Amy," Leo was saying, his voice slurring slightly from the champagne, like a lost puppy. "Where are we going?" he kept asking. Amelia let out a high-pitched giggle. "Oh God, don't. I feel a little bad, but it was for the best. Can you imagine the old relic sitting over there by the fireplace? It would have been social suicide." "Total mood killer," Leo agreed. "Honestly, I don't know how you put up with it, sis, but at least you finally got the house decluttered for a night. It looks fantastic." "Doesn't it?" she said, her voice full of pride. "Perfect." The old relic, decluttered. The words hit me with physical force. It wasn't just about making the party perfect. It was about contempt. A deep, abiding contempt for a good man whose only crime was growing old and sad in her perfect house. The smile on my face dissolved. Something inside me, something that had been bending for years, finally snapped. I didn't confront them. I didn't have the energy, the will. I simply turned and walked away, back into the throng of strangers, the noise of the party washing over me like a suffocating wave. I stayed until the last guest had left, performing my duties like an automaton. I helped the catering staff clear up. I stacked empty glasses, all in complete silence. When it was all over, in the quiet, early hours of the morning, Amelia found me in the living room. The room was a disaster zone, smelling of stale wine and perfume. She was flushed with success, her eyes bright and victorious. She swayed slightly as she walked toward me. She didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She held out a thick sheaf of papers, bound in a neat blue folder. "I think it's time," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I've met someone else, Alex. Someone who understands me, my lifestyle. He appreciates the finer things." She gestured around the room at the life I had funded. "It's been over for a long time. You know it has." I looked at the folder. "Divorce papers" was typed neatly on the label. "I had my lawyer draw these up," she continued, her tone becoming businesslike. "It's a very generous offer considering. The house is mine, of course. It was always mine, but I'm prepared to give you a lump sum, enough for you to get a small apartment and get back on your feet. It's more than you deserve, frankly." I said nothing. My mind was eerily calm, the earlier rage having cooled into something hard and dense, like granite. She mistook my silence for shock, for weakness. Her voice took on a sharper edge. "Here's the deal, Alex. You sign these papers. No fuss, no lawyers, no mess. You sign, take the money, and you and your father are gone within the week. Or," she paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "you can fight it, and I will bury you. I will drag this through the courts for years. I'll make sure you get nothing. My father has the best lawyers in the state. They will prove you contributed nothing. You'll end up on the street, and so will he. So, what's it going to be? Sign the divorce, or lose everything?" I looked from the papers to her face, the face of a woman I no longer recognized. The cruelty was so casual, so complete. Lose everything. She thought everything was this house, this life she had built. She didn't understand. Everything I truly cared about was sitting in a room in a respite home, feeling confused and abandoned. I reached out and took the folder from her. My hand was perfectly steady. "I'll read it," I said, my voice flat. A triumphant little smile played on her lips. She thought she had won. She turned and walked up the grand staircase, leaving me alone in the debris of our life. I didn't follow. I went to the small desk in the corner of the room, sat down, and opened the folder. The generous offer was an insult, a pittance, just enough to make her feel magnanimous while ensuring I was cast out with next to nothing. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel pain. I felt a strange liberating clarity. She had drawn the battle lines. She had laid out the terms of war, sign or lose everything. I closed the folder. I would sign, but it wouldn't be her document. It would be mine. The quiet decision was made. This wasn't going to be a divorce. It was going to be a demolition, and I was the one holding the detonator. The next morning, I drove to Silver Pines. The place had a cloying, antiseptic smell that clung to the air. My father was sitting in a common room, staring blankly at a television playing a game show at a jarringly loud volume. He looked smaller, diminished by the institutional beige of the room. When he saw me, a flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly followed by a familiar shame. "Alex," he said, his voice raspy. "I didn't know where." "She said it was just for a little while." "I know, Dad," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It was a mistake. Let's go home." Home was no longer the Colonial on the hill. I couldn't take him back there. Not now. When we got in the car, I told him, "We're not going back to Amelia's house, Dad. We're going to find our own place, just for a bit." He didn't ask questions. He just nodded, a deep, weary understanding in his eyes. He had seen it coming long before I had. He had lived it, in the quiet condescension and the daily dismissals. I told Amelia via a short, curt email that I was taking a few days to process and would be staying with a friend. I needed to move my father's things out of the house. She replied almost instantly, her message dripping with false concern. "Of course, Alex. Take all the time you need. I'm so glad you're being sensible about this." Sensible. She meant compliant. I spent the next 2 days in a blur of activity. I found a small, 2-bedroom, furnished apartment for rent on a monthly basis. It was clean, anonymous, and blessedly quiet. While Amelia was out at one of her luncheons, I went back to the house with a couple of boxes. I moved with a cold, methodical efficiency. I packed my father's belongings first. His books, the framed photo of my mother he kept on his nightstand, his worn armchair that Amelia had always hated. Then I packed my own essentials, clothes, work documents, and the contents of my home office. It was in the office that my new life began to take shape. I was packing up old computer equipment, dusty towers and monitors from a decade of upgrades. Tucked away in a cabinet was a box labeled Old Drives. Inside were several external hard drives, relics from a time before the cloud was ubiquitous. On a whim, I took the entire box. It felt important, though I couldn't say why. We moved into the apartment that evening. It was sparse, the furniture generic, but it was ours. The air wasn't thick with unspoken resentment. After I helped my father get settled in his new room, I sat on the unfamiliar sofa in the unfamiliar living room and felt, for the first time in years, a sense of peace. The separation was a balm. The distance gave me perspective. In that quiet, sterile apartment, the past began to unspool. I started to connect the dots, to see the pattern I had willfully ignored for a decade. I remembered the casual way Amelia had dismissed my promotion because it didn't come with a fancier title. I remembered how she'd balanced our finances, which meant all our income went into a joint account from which she controlled all major spending. I remembered the conversation about my inheritance. "Let's put it into the kitchen, Alex," she had said, her hand on my arm. "It's the heart of the home, our home." The words echoed in my mind now, laden with a duplicity I hadn't seen. I started digging. I spent hours online, pulling up old bank statements, credit card bills, anything I could access. I created a spreadsheet, a meticulous ledger of my financial life. I tracked the transfer of my inheritance. I tracked my salary deposits. Then I tracked the expenses. The thousands for her designer clothes, the country club membership, the the constant bleeding drain of money on a lifestyle that was hers, not ours. And then I saw it. A recurring monthly transfer from our joint account to a separate account I didn't recognize. It had been happening for 6 months, the amount increasing each time. She wasn't just planning to leave me, she was actively plundering our shared resources to fund her escape. The anger, which had cooled into a hard resolve, began to heat up again. This wasn't just a marriage ending. This was a long con, and I was the mark. Driven by a new cold fury, I turned to the box of old hard drives. I bought a universal adapter and started plugging them into my laptop one by one. Most were filled with old photos, music, outdated software. But one, a backup from an ancient desktop we'd gotten rid of years ago, held something different. It was a mirror of the entire machine's contents from nearly 11 years ago, just before our wedding. I browsed through the file structure, a digital archaeologist sifting through the layers of a buried city. I found a folder named Amelia Personal. My finger hovered over the mouse. It felt like an invasion of privacy, but the divorce papers on the coffee table were a declaration that privacy between us was dead. I clicked. Inside were documents, old college essays, photos, and a subfolder named Correspondence. It contained saved email files. My heart hammered against my ribs. I opened it. There were dozens of emails, mostly banal exchanges with friends, but then I saw a thread with the subject line, "The House." The sender was Amelia. The recipient was her father. I opened the first email. It was from Amelia, dated 2 months before our wedding. "Daddy," it read, "Alex and I were talking about finances. He wants to talk about the house, about maybe putting his name on the deed after we're married since he plans to help with the upkeep and wants to invest some of his own money into it." My breath caught in my throat. Her father's reply came a day later. I read his words, and the world tilted. "Amelia," he wrote, "under no circumstances are you to add his name to that deed. That property is a family asset and must be protected. However, his desire to invest is a positive sign. You should absolutely encourage him to invest his own money into renovations. Frame it as building your future together. It will give him a sense of ownership and commitment without you having to sacrifice any legal control. In the unfortunate event that things don't work out down the line, the asset remains yours, free and clear. Let him pay for the perishable improvements. You hold the land. That's just smart planning, my girl." Smart planning. A premeditated, cynical strategy to exploit my love and trust, to use my own money to enhance the value of an asset I would never have a claim to, all while making me believe I was building a life with a partner. The unfortunate event that things don't work out. It was all there, in black and white. A blueprint for my own fleecing, drafted before I even said, "I do." I felt sick. I pushed back from the table, a wave of nausea washing over me. All the years of my labor, my money, my misplaced faith. It wasn't a marriage. It was a business transaction, and I was the unwitting investor with no equity. But the universe wasn't done with its revelations. A thought struck me. Our home security system. It was connected to the cloud. Amelia was tech-savvy enough to delete files, but I was a software engineer. I knew that deleted rarely meant gone. I logged into our security account. The recent history was wiped clean, just as I expected. She had covered her tracks, but cloud services have backups, redundancies. I spent the next 2 hours using my technical knowledge to access the deep storage, the server-side archives that most users don't even know exist. And there, in a folder of automatically backed up data from the week before the party, I found it. A series of video files, labeled by date and time. My hand trembled as I clicked on one from a Tuesday afternoon, a time I was always at work. The video loaded. It was from the camera in the living room. The quality was sharp, the audio crystal clear. It showed Amelia on the sofa, laughing with a man. A handsome, silver-haired man I recognized from photos of her social circle. Her someone else. He was holding the framed photo of my parents that I kept on the mantelpiece. "Is this the famous father-in-law?" he asked, a sneer in his voice. "That's him," Amelia said, sipping a glass of wine. He looked at the photo, then back at Amelia, a cruel smirk on his face. "You really need to clear out the deadwood, darling. Get rid of the old man and the deadweight husband. Start fresh." I watched, my blood turning to ice, as my wife, the woman I had sworn to love and cherish, reached out, took the glass from his hand, and smiled at him. "Soon," she said, her voice a low purr. "Very soon." She leaned in and kissed him, a long, passionate kiss in the heart of the home I had helped build, right in front of the picture of the family she was plotting to discard. I slammed the laptop shut. The sound echoed in the silent apartment. There was no more room for doubt, no more space for sorrow. The grief and pain had been burned away, cauterized by the white-hot fire of betrayal. My mission, which had been vague, now came into sharp, crystalline focus. This was no longer about a fair settlement. This was about justice. It was about honor. She had made a mockery of my love, my work, and my family. She had called my father Deadwood. She wanted me to lose everything. She had no idea what everything really meant. I was going to teach her. The first call I made the next morning was not to a divorce lawyer, but to a litigator. I spent hours researching, looking for a shark, someone who specialized in complex high-asset divorces with elements of fraud. I found Sarah Kensington. Her website described her as a tactical and tenacious advocate for her clients. Her reviews were glowing, painting a picture of a lawyer who was not only brilliant, but deeply empathetic. I secured a consultation for the following day. I spent the intervening time organizing. The rage had settled into a cold, productive energy. I printed the emails between Amelia and her father. I saved the security video to 3 separate thumb drives. I compiled my spreadsheet of financial contributions, cross-referencing every renovation expense with bank statements and credit card bills. I gathered every digital receipt, every email exchange with contractors, every invoice I had paid for the house over the last decade. By the time I walked into Sarah Kensington's office, I had a binder 3 inches thick. Her office was not the opulent, intimidating space I had imagined. It was modern, clean, and professional, with large windows that let in the afternoon light. Sarah herself was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and a calm, reassuring demeanor. She listened to my story without interruption, her expression unreadable. I walked her through the history of our marriage, the house, my father's arrival, the party, and the ultimatum. I spoke with a flat, emotionless precision, determined not to come across as a hysterical, wronged husband, but as a credible witness to a long-term deception. When I finished, I pushed the binder across her desk. "This is the evidence," I said. She opened it and began to read. She started with the financial breakdown, her eyes scanning the columns of figures. She occasionally nodded to herself. Then she moved to the printouts of the emails. As she read the exchange between Amelia and her father, her eyebrows shot up. She read it a second time, a grim, thoughtful expression on her face. "Well," she said softly, "that's brazen." Finally, I handed her a thumb drive. "This is a video from our home security system, taken the week before the party." She plugged it into her computer. As she watched the scene unfold, Amelia, her lover, the mocking of my family photo, the Deadwood comment, her calm demeanor hardened. A flash of genuine anger crossed her face. When the video ended, she took a slow, deep breath and looked me straight in the eye. "Alex," she said, her voice firm, "your wife has made a catastrophic mistake. She and her father have documented a clear case for fraudulent inducement. They created a scheme to have you significantly increase the value of her sole and separate property under the false pretense that you were building a shared marital asset. The legal term for that is fraud." She leaned forward. "And this," she tapped the monitor where the video was paused, "this is what we call evidence of marital misconduct and extreme cruelty. In a no-fault state, that doesn't always matter, but when combined with the financial fraud and her clear attempt to hide marital assets," she gestured to my spreadsheet detailing the secret bank account, "it paints a picture of such profound bad faith that no judge would ignore it. Her ultimatum to you was based on a lie. The house is not untouchable, not anymore." A wave of vindication washed over me, so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Sarah's expression turned strategic. "We do nothing, not yet. The greatest asset we have right now is her arrogance. She believes she holds all the cards. She believes you are defeated and will sign her insulting offer, We are going to let her believe that for as long as possible. Her plan was simple and brilliant. I was to play the part of the beaten man. I sent Amelia an email, drafted by Sarah, stating that I was overwhelmed and needed to have the agreement reviewed, but that I didn't have funds for a top lawyer. I told her I was seeking advice from a legal aid clinic. This was a calculated move, designed to bolster her confidence and make her feel completely secure in her position. It worked perfectly. Her reply was condescendingly magnanimous. "I understand, Alex. Take your time. I'm glad you're not going to be difficult. It's for the best." Her lawyer sent a follow-up letter, a masterpiece of patronizing legalese, reiterating the generous, non-negotiable offer and urging a swift resolution. They were so sure of their victory. They had no idea they were walking into a perfectly laid trap. While they relaxed, we worked. Sarah brought in a forensic accountant, a quiet man named David with eyes that seemed to see through spreadsheets and into the very soul of a financial transaction. He took my initial research and went deeper. He subpoenaed bank records Amelia didn't know we could access. He uncovered the full extent of her financial duplicity, tracing the money she had siphoned from our joint account into a high-yield investment account in her name only. He prepared a detailed report that was as damning as it was undeniable. Meanwhile, I became an investigator. On Sarah's advice, I reached out to the primary contractors who had worked on the kitchen and sunroom. I remembered them well. I'd spent weeks with them, supervising the work. I met them for coffee, one by one. I didn't mention the divorce. I simply said I was putting together a portfolio of the work done on the house for insurance purposes, and asked if they would be willing to sign a sworn affidavit detailing the scope of the project, the costs, and, most importantly, who they dealt with and who paid them. "Oh yeah, I remember you, Alex," said the head builder, a gruff man named Mike. "You were there every day. Your wife, she just showed up to pick the paint colors. You were the one writing the checks." He happily signed the affidavit. The electrician and the plumber did the same. Their sworn statements corroborated my financial records perfectly, creating an ironclad case that I was the one who had managed and funded the entire renovation. My father became an unexpected pillar of strength. Seeing my quiet resolve, he seemed to find a piece of his old self. His sadness was replaced by a quiet, righteous anger on my behalf. He started recalling details I had long forgotten. "I remember when you were doing the kitchen," he said one evening, as we sat in our new, plain living room. "Amelia brought her parents over to see the progress. Her father clapped you on the back. He said, 'Attaboy, Alex, building sweat equity. That's the way to do it.' And Amelia. She said this house was your legacy to your future children." His memory was sharp, his testimony pure. He wasn't just a victim. He was now a key witness to the web of lies she had spun. Sarah was thrilled. The testimony of an elderly, dignified man who had been so cruelly mistreated would be devastatingly effective in front of any judge or mediator. For 6 weeks, we lived a double life. To Amelia and her world, I was a broken man, licking my wounds, slowly capitulating to her demands. I exchanged bland emails with her, never betraying a hint of the storm that was gathering. She grew impatient, then cocky. "Alex, my lawyer says the legal aid people are just slowing things down. Just sign the papers. Let's get this over with." "I'm almost there," I would write back, just trying to make sure I understand everything. The element of surprise was our most powerful weapon. We were building an arsenal in the shadows, while the enemy sunbathed on the deck, utterly convinced the war was already won. The date for the formal mediation was set. It would take place at the offices of her father's prestigious law firm, the Lion's Den. Amelia thought she was summoning me for my execution. She had no idea she was walking into her own judgment day. The day of the mediation dawned gray and overcast, a perfect mirror of the cold apprehension in my stomach. Despite our preparation, despite the mountain of evidence, I felt a tremor of fear. This was it, the point of no return. "Just stick to the plan," Sarah had told me the night before. "Let them talk. Let them build their pedestal as high as they want. The fall will be that much greater." I dressed simply, in a modest suit that was a stark contrast to the expensive tailoring I knew Amelia and her lawyer would be wearing. I met Sarah in the lobby of the law firm's gleaming downtown skyscraper. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and glass, designed to intimidate. "Ready?" she asked, her eyes calm and steady. I took a deep breath. Ready. We rode the silent, high-speed elevator to the 40th floor. The doors opened onto a hushed, carpeted reception area. A stern-looking receptionist directed us to the main conference room. The room was cavernous, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that could have seated 20. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, shrouded in mist. At the far end of the table sat Team Amelia, my wife, looking impeccable and bored in a sharp, cream-colored suit. Her lawyer, a portly man in his 60s, named Arthur Vance, who exuded an aura of smug self-satisfaction, and to my surprise, her brother, Leo. He was slumped in his chair, scrolling on his phone, present only as a symbol of the family's united front against me. Amelia didn't look at me as we entered. She was examining her nails. Leo offered a faint, contemptuous smirk. Only Arthur Vance stood, offering a perfunctory handshake to Sarah and a dismissive nod to me. "Sarah, good to see you," he boomed, his voice overly hearty. "And this must be your client, Alex. Let's all have a seat. I'm confident we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably this morning." We sat down opposite them. The distance across the polished table felt like a mile-wide chasm. The air was thick with tension and the faint scent of expensive cologne. Vance began, his tone condescendingly paternal. "Now, Alex," he said, leaning forward on his elbows, "I understand you've had some time to review the settlement offer. Amelia has been extraordinarily patient, and I must say, extraordinarily generous." He slid a copy of the original divorce papers across the table. "As we've discussed, the marital home is Amelia's premarital separate property. Legally, you have no claim to it whatsoever. The funds she has offered you are a gift, a gesture of goodwill to help you transition into your new life. There is no legal obligation for her to provide even this much. My advice to you, as a human being and as an officer of the court, is to accept this generosity, sign the papers, and allow everyone to move on." He sat back, a self-satisfied look on his face. He had laid out his case, so simple, so clear-cut. He believed it to be unassailable. Amelia watched me, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips. She was waiting for my surrender. I let the silence stretch out. I looked at Vance. I looked at Leo. Then my eyes settled on Amelia. I held her gaze. "Before I consider signing anything," I said, my voice quiet but carrying in the silent room, "I believe my counsel has a few points of clarification to raise." This was Sarah's cue. She opened her briefcase and retrieved a single slim folder. It seemed insignificant next to the thick document Vance had presented. "Arthur," she began, her tone pleasant but firm, "we agree that the house was legally Amelia's property prior to the marriage. However, we have a significant body of evidence suggesting that my client was fraudulently induced to invest substantial personal funds into the improvement of that property under false pretenses." Vance's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Fraud? That's a very serious and frankly baseless accusation, Sarah. Any funds Alex contributed were clearly gifts to the marriage, improving a home he also lived in and enjoyed." "Were they?" Sarah asked, her voice still light. She opened her folder and slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was the top page of the forensic accountant's report, a summary chart showing a net total. "Over the past decade, my client invested a total of $478,000 of his separate, inherited, and earned income directly into capital improvements on the property. We have bank records, canceled checks, and sworn affidavits from every contractor involved to prove it." Vance glanced at the paper, his expression hardening. Leo sat up a little straighter, putting his phone down. Amelia's face clouded over with irritation. "That's irrelevant," Vance snapped, his bonhomie evaporating. "He has no claim. He was improving his own standard of living." "Not when it was part of a deliberate, documented strategy to defraud," Sarah countered smoothly. She slid a second set of papers across the table. They were the printouts of the emails. "I believe you'll recognize this exchange. It's an email thread between your client and her father from 2 months before the wedding." She didn't need to read it. I watched as Amelia's eyes scanned the page. I saw the exact moment she read her father's words. "Let him pay for the perishable improvements. You hold the land." The color drained from her face. She looked up, her eyes wide with panic, first at her lawyer, then at me. The mask of cool indifference was gone, replaced by a raw, naked shock. Vance snatched the papers and read them quickly. His face, which had been florid, went pale. He was a smart lawyer. He knew exactly what he was looking at. A premeditated plan. A smoking gun. The room was suddenly plunged into a silence so profound I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. The power had shifted. It was no longer in their hands. It was sitting in a slim folder on our side of the table. And Sarah hadn't even gotten to the worst of it. The confident, smug expressions on their faces had vanished, replaced by a dawning horror. The air crackled. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. It was an ambush. Amelia was the first to break the suffocating silence. That's private, she stammered, her voice a reedy whisper. She looked at her lawyer, desperate for him to fix it. They were private emails. They can't use that. It's taken out of context. Arthur Vance looked ill. He knew better. In a civil dispute like this, anything relevant to the case was discoverable. There was no context that could sanitize the raw cynicism of those words. He cleared his throat, trying to regain some semblance of control. Sarah, this is highly irregular. My client was merely seeking advice from her father. Sarah cut him off, her voice losing its pleasant edge and taking on the hardness of steel. Advice on how to defraud her future husband? I think a judge would find that highly irregular, Arthur, but let's set aside the issue of the house for a moment. There's also the matter of the dissipation of marital assets. She opened her laptop, turned it around, and placed it in the center of the vast table. And the matter of marital conduct. Amelia stared at the laptop as if it were a venomous snake. What is that? She demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and rage. Evidence, Sarah said simply. She clicked the mouse. The security video began to play. The familiar sight of our living room filled the screen. Then, Amelia and her lover appeared. The audio was perfect. Every word, every laugh, every condescending sneer echoed in the dead, quiet boardroom. I watched Amelia's face as her lover held up the photograph of my parents. I watched her as he called my father the old man and me the dead weight husband. Leo, who had been watching with a sort of morbid curiosity, flinched. His smugness had completely evaporated, replaced by a look of genuine shock. He looked at his sister, as if seeing her for the first time. Then came the final, damning moment on the screen. Amelia's smiling face as she leaned in to kiss the man who had just insulted her entire family. Her purred promise. Soon. Very soon. Sarah paused the video on the image of their kiss. The silence that followed was heavier than a tombstone. Amelia was breathing in ragged, shallow gasps. Her perfectly constructed world, her image, her narrative of the wronged wife leaving a passionless marriage. It had all just been immolated on the altar of a 15-inch screen. Arthur Vance, a man who had built a career on bluster and control, looked utterly defeated. He slowly closed his eyes, as if the sight of the screen was causing him physical pain. He had been played, not by us, but by his own client. He had walked into this room armed with lies, and we had met him with irrefutable, soul-crushing truth. He opened his eyes and looked at Sarah, a flicker of professional respect mixed with profound disgust for his own client. This meeting, he said, his voice a low growl, is over. He started gathering his papers with shaking hands, his movements jerky and furious. He didn't look at Amelia. He didn't look at Leo. But Amelia wasn't ready to surrender. The shock had curdled into a wild, cornered animal rage. She leaped to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at me. You! She shrieked, her voice cracking. You spied on me. You disgusting bastard. You recorded me in my own home. I stood up slowly, the adrenaline of the moment making everything seem hyper-focused. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice coming out low and steady, a stark contrast to her hysteria. Your own home, the one I paid to renovate, the one you conspired to cheat me out of before we were even married? I paused, letting the words sink in. You came to me after humiliating my father, and you told me to sign your papers or lose everything. So, I'm signing. I reached into my own jacket pocket and pulled out the original divorce papers she had given me, the ones with the insulting offer. I slid them across the polished mahogany table until they stopped in front of her. "But I won't be signing my name to your lies," I continued, my voice resonating with a finality that silenced her. "My signature is going on a new petition. Sarah will be filing it this afternoon. A petition that details everything: the fraud, the hidden assets, the cruelty. A petition that tells the truth." That was the final blow. Her composure shattered into a million pieces. The elegant, controlled socialite vanished, replaced by a raw, screaming fury. "I'll ruin you," she screamed, her face contorted and ugly. "My father will ruin you. You'll get nothing. Nothing." It was a hollow threat, and everyone in the room knew it. The power was gone. All that was left was noise. Leo, looking horrified, stood up and tried to grab her arm. "Amelia, stop. Just stop." She shoved him away violently. "Don't you touch me. This is his fault." Arthur Vance had had enough. His reputation was on the line. "Amelia, be silent," he commanded, his voice a thunderous roar that finally cut through her hysterics. "Not one more word." He grabbed her by the elbow, his face a mask of cold fury. "We are leaving. Now." He began to physically escort her from the room. She was still trying to shout abuse at me over her shoulder, but her words were dissolving into incoherent sobs. The final image I had of my wife was of her being half-dragged, half-pushed out of that boardroom by her own lawyer, her perfect makeup streaked with tears of rage and humiliation, her brother trailing behind them like a chastened child. The heavy door clicked shut, plunging the room back into silence. The damning image of her and her lover was still frozen on the laptop screen. It was over. The war was won. For a long moment after they were gone, neither Sarah nor I moved. The silence they left behind was vast and absolute. The only sound was the distant city traffic, a faint hum 40 stories below. The adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for hours began to recede, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its wake. But it was a clean exhaustion, the feeling of having completed a marathon, not the weary fatigue of endless suffering. Sarah finally broke the silence. She reached over and gently closed the laptop, banishing the toxic image from the room. She looked at me, a small, weary smile on her face. "You did it, Alex," she said softly. She placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture of solidarity that felt immensely grounding. "You stayed calm. You were perfect." I just nodded, unable to form words. A wave of emotion, a complex cocktail of relief, vindication, and a strange, lingering sadness washed over me. The weight of a decade of being underestimated, of being subtly diminished, of having my love and labor taken for granted, had finally been lifted. I felt hollowed out, but in a good way, as if something toxic had been surgically removed. I took a deep, shuddering breath, the first truly free breath I had taken in years. The fallout was swift and brutal. As Sarah had predicted, Arthur Vance wanted to contain the damage. The prospect of the emails and the video being entered into the public record during a court battle was a nightmare scenario for Amelia and her prominent family. A public trial would be a social and financial catastrophe for them. Less than 24 hours later, a new settlement offer arrived via courier. It wasn't an offer, it was a complete and total surrender. Amelia agreed to every single one of our demands. The house was to be sold immediately, with the proceeds from the sale to be split exactly 50-50, a formal acknowledgement of my financial contributions. She was to repay in full every dollar the forensic accountant had proven she'd diverted into her secret account, with interest. She was to cover all of my legal fees, including Sarah's retainer and the forensic accountant's bill. In return, we would agree to a confidentiality clause, ensuring the evidence that had destroyed her would never see the light of day. It was more than I had ever expected. It wasn't just a financial victory, it was a moral one. The terms of the settlement were a quiet, legal admission of her guilt. The consequences for her rippled out beyond the financial. Her lover, the silver-haired man from the video, was a prominent figure in their social circle, married to a woman with her own money and influence. When word of the impending messy divorce got out, rumors travel fast in those circles. He panicked. The relationship, built on the thrill of transgression and shared arrogance, couldn't withstand the first breath of real-world consequences. It imploded. He went crawling back to his wife, leaving Amelia to face the wreckage alone. Her family, who had always prized appearance and reputation above all else, was horrified. Her father, the architect of the fraudulent scheme, was furious, not at her immorality, but at her sloppiness. He was apoplectic that she had been so careless as to be caught. They began to distance themselves, treating her not as a daughter to be supported, but as a liability to be managed. About a week after the mediation, as I was packing the last of my things from the apartment to move into a temporary rental while the house sale went through, my phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something compelled me to answer. Hello? Alex? The voice was thin, fragile, stripped of all its familiar confidence and authority. It was Amelia. I said nothing. Alex, please, she began, and then her voice broke, dissolving into a racking sob. I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I made a terrible, terrible mistake. She sounded like a stranger. The powerful, imperious woman I had known was gone, replaced by this weeping, desperate person on the other end of the line. She went on, a rambling, incoherent torrent of apologies and excuses. She blamed her lover, her father, the pressure of her social circle. She never quite took full ownership herself. I've lost everything, Alex, she cried, the words choked with self-pity. He left me. My parents will barely speak to me. I have to sell my home. I've lost everything. The irony was so thick, so bitter, it almost made me laugh. Sign or lose everything, she had told me. She had meant it as a threat to me, never imagining it could become her own reality. I listened to her cry, and for a fleeting second, I felt a flicker of something. Not love, not even pity, but a sort of detached sadness for the broken person she had become. But then, as clearly as if he were standing next to me, I pictured my father's face in that beige, sterile room at Silver Pines. I saw his confusion, his shame. I heard the mocking voice of her lover calling him the old man. I saw Amelia's smiling face in that video, a picture of casual, breathtaking cruelty, and the flicker of sadness died, replaced by a calm, cold finality. She hadn't lost everything. She had lost things. She had lost a house, money, a lover, her social standing. She had lost the game she herself had created. But I had almost lost my father's dignity. I had almost lost my self-respect. Those were the things that mattered. Those were the things I had fought to reclaim. When her sobs finally subsided into sniffles, I spoke. My voice was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was just empty. Goodbye, Amelia, I said. And I ended the call. I held the phone in my hand for a moment. Then I blocked her number. I blocked her brother's number. I blocked her parents' numbers. I systematically erased every digital link to that life, to that person. I was closing the door, and I was locking it behind me. It was, finally, truly over. 6 months passed. The world turned, seasons changed, and the sharp, jagged edges of the past began to soften. The house sold quickly, even in a slow market. Its beauty was undeniable, a perfect facade that hid the rotten core of the life that had been lived within it. The day the money transferred to my account, I felt no elation, only a quiet sense of closure. It was not a jackpot, it was restitution. I didn't buy a flashy condo or a big empty house to rival the one I'd left. I used my share of the proceeds to buy a modest, solid brick bungalow in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood on the other side of town. It had a small, well-tended garden, and, most importantly, a detached garage at the back of the property. The day we moved in, my father walked through the rooms with a sense of wonder. He ran his hand along the smooth oak of the fireplace mantel. He looked out the kitchen window at the small yard. "It's a good house, Alex," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Good bones." I spent the next few weeks converting the garage into a workshop for him. I insulated the walls, ran new electrical wiring, and installed bright, clean lighting. I bought him a new workbench, a new table saw, and a set of high-quality chisels. The first time he walked into the finished space, he just stood there for a long moment, taking it all in. He ran his hand over the smooth surface of the workbench, his old carpenter's hands reawakening. He looked at me, and his eyes were shining with tears. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have to. A new normal began to take shape, a peaceful normal. My father was a different man. He was up early every morning, out in his workshop with a cup of coffee. The sounds of sanding and sawing became the new soundtrack of my life, a gentle, productive rhythm that was the antithesis of the tense silence or sharp arguments that had defined my old home. He started making things again, a beautiful bookshelf for the living room, a set of hand-carved coasters, a birdhouse for the backyard. The sense of purpose had returned to him. The cloud of grief and diminishment had lifted, burned away by the bright sun of dignity restored. We had dinner together every night at the small kitchen table. We talked about my day at work, about the project he was working on, about the news, about memories of my mother. The silences were comfortable, companionable. The quiet in this new house was not an absence of sound. It was the presence of peace. One evening, I was sitting on the back porch, watching him in his workshop. He was hunched over a piece of dark walnut wood, carefully planing its surface, his movements economical and precise, born of a lifetime of practice. The light from the workshop spilled out onto the lawn, a warm, golden rectangle in the gathering twilight. I found myself reflecting on the whole cataclysmic year, on Amelia's ultimatum, which had felt like the end of the world, but had been in reality a declaration of independence. She had meant to break me, to cast me out into the wilderness. Instead, she had forced me onto a path I was too complacent, too beaten down to find on my own. She had intended to strip me of everything I had, but in doing so, she had revealed how little of what I had was actually worth keeping. My fight had not been born of greed or revenge. I realized that now. I hadn't fought for half the value of a house. I had fought for the principle that my work, my contributions, my love had value. I had fought for my father, for the simple, non-negotiable idea that an old man's dignity is not a piece of clutter to be swept away for the sake of appearances. I had fought to reclaim my own self-respect, a thing I had allowed to be chipped away piece by piece over 10 long years. Amelia had lost her house, her money, her status. She had seen her perfect life crumble into dust. But her loss was one of veneer. She had lost the shiny, polished surface. My potential loss had been one of substance, of core. She had threatened my foundation. I thought about the divorce papers she had thrown at me. Sign or lose everything. I had, in the end, lost a wife I no longer loved, a house that was never truly my home, and a life that was a gilded cage. And in exchange, I had gained this quiet peace, the sound of my father woodworking, the freedom to be myself, my own name on a deed to a home built not on lies, but on love and mutual respect. I hadn't lost everything. I had gained it all back. Watching my father in his workshop, I thought about the wood he worked with. Some pieces, he'd told me, look beautiful on the outside, but are full of knots and rot on the inside. No matter how much you sand them or varnish them, the weakness is still there. Others are plain on the surface, but are strong and true all the way through. My old life was a veneer, beautiful, polished, and rotten to the core. Amelia's ultimatum had forced me to strip it all away, to see the decay beneath. It's a painful process, stripping away a life you thought you knew, but it's the only way to find what's real, what's solid, what's true. Sometimes, you have to face the threat of losing everything to finally understand what is truly worth holding on to.